What's poppin', everybody? It's your boy G watching Keeping This Tech. And in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the A7V. It was just announced this week, and I'm going to compare it to my A7R5. I did a video a couple of years ago now comparing the A7R5 and the A7 IV. Interesting thing is, after about 4 months or so, I ended up selling the A7 IV. It's almost like that video helped me decide which one I was going to keep. And ultimately, there were so many things that would disappoint me about the A7 IV every time I would use it. I was like, let me go ahead and sell it and use the money for other things. Now, fast forward to just this last week when Sony did effectively three things. Number one, they killed the FX2. They absolutely killed it. If the FX2 was shot and it was hurt and it was in the hospital in intensive care, well, they sent somebody at the hospital and they took care of the FX2 with the release of the A7V. Because there's no way in any world I would recommend getting the FX2, even if your primary goal is video, to get that over the A7V. Never. Also, they have considered that open gate is irrelevant. And well, that's up for debate because we'll talk about all of that in a little bit. And I won't spend too much time on it, but I will kind of address the fact that it is a gated sensor instead of an open gate sensor. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into the video. All right, guys, so let's get into it. The first thing I guess I want to address is how I started to feel about Sony after the FX2 release. I was like, damn, if they come out with an A7R5 body with just the A7 IV guts in there, I'm going to be very upset, right? Because they could have easily just slapped on the AI processing chip, gave it the updated color science and said, whoop, it's a new camera. Look we got a new display. But it would have been an absolute fail. And I promise you, I would have ended up getting another camera from another brand when it was time for me to upgrade or move on. I wasn't going to get rid of any of the cameras that I existingly have or that I was using all the time. My A7R5, my A7S III, and the ZVE1 worked just fine for me. But the day will come when I need to replace them, and I was absolutely going to be looking outside of Sony for that. The R6 III absolutely caught my attention, and that C50 is looking really nice. So Sony had to deliver really on this A7V for me to feel like I didn't need to go anywhere. And I'm gonna tell you straight up, they did. As far as I'm concerned, they nailed it, they knocked it out of the park. And what this camera is what the FX2 should have been, and so that was my big concern. But that being said, let's talk about the A7 IV, the issues that I had with it, why I ended up selling mine, and how they've rectified that, even in the sea of all of this competition outside of Sony, right? We got the Panasonic cameras, the Canon cameras, and whoever else. First of all, the number one thing that I did not like about the A7 IV was the crop in 4K 60. So having the same crop in 4K 60 on the FX2 was an absolute no-go for me. And it just didn't work. And obviously the crop in 4K 60 has to do with the fact that there's a slow sensor in there. That rolling shutter was absolutely atrocious, right? And I didn't want that. And again, that same rolling shutter is in the FX2. So those two things were just absolute no-goes, and it was a dead stop as soon as that was discovered. The other part of that is that for the shooting in bursts, you can only shoot 10 frames a second if you're shooting in compressed RAW. Uncompressed would give you 7 frames a second. And if you wanted to do like a medium or a small kind of lossless, maybe not have so much resolution, then you would still be stuck at 7, even if it's shooting and capturing a smaller file size. Obviously, shooting compressed there's nothing wrong with it. Most of the time, you're not going to notice any difference. I'd say 99, if not 98% of the time, you don't really need to have uncompressed RAW. It's really if you're going to be in extreme situations where you might have messed up with the flash and it popped too much, or you were completely underexposed, that you can maybe get a little bit more headroom with editing if you're shooting uncompressed. But for the most part, you're not going to miss out on much. And to me, that was one of the things that bothered me. Also, not that I had any issue with the autofocus at all. I think it's still excellent and was excellent back then. It's just that the autofocus on this was better. The screen, the display was better. The A7R Mark V felt like a more refined camera. It felt like what the A7 IV should have been, but with 33 megapixels, right? And I mentioned that 4K 60 crop, that's APS-C, so 1.5 times is the value for the crop. Over here, you'd have like a 1.2, and even that 1.2, even though it's cropped on here, it's still better. Back then I wanted Sony to give us, you know, even pixel binned or line skipped 4K 60, but that oversampled 4K is really what, you know, you want. Ultimately, those were the key factors for me: the design of the body, you know, the capability of the A7R Mark V, and the refinement of it over the A7 IV made me want to get rid of it, plus, you know, the crop and the slower burst rate. So fast forward to last week, and Sony went ahead and gave us the A7V. Now, the thing that I think is notable about this is that in the beginning of their video, they said something like basic redefined, or redefining basic. And they also introduced for the very first time the Beyond's XR2 processing chip. Now that chip is important for a lot of reasons. It is what handles all of the calculations, all of the computational stuff or AI stuff that it's doing. And also you have to imagine that this is their baseline. And the way I look at it like is this is their M1 of this kind of chip. And so when they come out with that future A7S4 or FX3 Mark II, or, you know, all the other cameras like the A7R Mark VI, I would imagine that this chip will be further improved. It'll be more enhanced. This processing chip actually works in tandem with a gated 33 megapixel backside illuminated stacked sensor, which is a mouthful. Of course, they don't use the term gated, I just threw that in there. But anyway, this sensor now is fast enough to shoot up to 30 frames a second in photos, which is major. Also, I want to point out that with all the videos that I've seen, and I was actually waiting to see what Jared Polin would say in his video, if there was any word about uncompressed file being shot at 10 frames a second or even higher. It doesn't even seem like there's an uncompressed option from all of the screenshots that we've seen. So I don't know if that's kind of the max at 10 frames a second and they're removing the whole uncompressed thing. Either way, 10 frames mechanical, and then you have 30 frames a second. I just want to pause and point out how significant that is. It wasn't that long ago that the A9, the first one, was kind of like the flagship, right? The A9 shot 30 frames a second. That camera was what, I think $4,500 or something like that. And to think that we now have that same capability in terms of its burst rate on this camera, which is under $3,000. The thing about the A9 that was interesting is that it was $4,500. Its calling card or whatever was that it shot 30 frames a second. It had video, but none of the picture profiles. So if you really were serious about using it for video, you would look away because it didn't have S-Log2 or anything like that. And speaking of video, it only had 8-bit color back then. And so now you have a camera that pretty much has S-Log3, which is, we know is amazing, 10-bit color. You have all the picture profiles as well as S-Cinetone. You get 30 frames a second. And again, all of this now is for $3,000. That's a huge deal. Now, there's going to be a lot of people that have gone out and spent a lot of money on their A1-2s and, you know, the A9-3s. And now you get a camera that's going to give you 30 frames a second. And they might not think that that's a big deal because they have 120 frames a second. Well, realistically, most of the time, I mean, unless you're shooting at the Olympics or doing something crazy like that, you don't need 120 frames a second burst rate. That is like just overkill, right? And so it's one of these things where it's kind of like the iPad, where like it could be as fast as it can ever be, but if your apps and the ecosystem or the OS system is only kind of limiting you to the lowest common denominator, then that's all that matters. So either way, what I'm trying to say is that 30 frames a second is way more than enough, and you now have that at that base rate. Plus, I want to also say that you also get pre-capture now, which is amazing, up to 1 second. And I guess the other part about that whole burst and the 30 frames a second and the pre-capture is that you're going to get those images in absolute full resolution and full color and bit depth. No compromise with that. And I don't think there's another camera out there that can claim that for photography. And that's a huge deal. You can now program a button to do the burst if you want. Again, major, major deal. And that's because of that stack sensor. It's because of that processor that's allowing all of that stuff to happen. So everything about the camera is supposed to be much faster now. Also, it minimizes the rolling shutter and the warpiness effects. You're gonna still have some there because ultimately it's still not like a global shutter. It's still not a fully stacked sensor, but it's definitely going to be usable. And at least for me personally, I have the A7R Mark V when I'm shooting video. I'm sorry, when I'm shooting photos. And then I have my A7S III when I'm shooting video, and my ZV-E1 as my backup camera. I'll rig it out, and I have two of the same sensors for video. Now, it's interesting because if I'm shooting, scenes where I know it's going to be fast action and fast paced, or it's going to be low light, I'll actually shoot with my A7S III instead of my A7R Mark V, because I know that it can't really handle it that way. And now this A7V is going to be able to step in and do that, and it's going to also be able to step in and handle video applications for me as well. All of this power and speed also translates to video. Now, this camera now can do 4K full frame 4K 60, which is amazing. Now, there's some conversation about how it's underwhelming and disappointing in video. People are complaining about how it's not really full frame 4K 60 because you have to turn on the toggle. Bro, we're gonna get into all of that in a bit. But I just wanna say it's crazy because I feel like it's true. You can't make everybody happy. Somebody's gonna find something to complain about. It's just wild. Anyway, back to the 4K 60. First of all, the 4K 60 is oversampled. It's not line skipped, it's not pixel binned. And yes, you do have to toggle on a setting for it to actually unlock the full frame 4K 60. But how many other settings do we have to change to use the camera the way that we want to when we first get it out of the box? I mean, when you get these cameras, even now, if you get these cameras, they come in and they're default to 1080p. You actually have to go in there and set everything to 4K. You got to change the bit depth too. You got to change it up to from 8 to 10. It doesn't come by default that way. You also have to set it to shoot at S-Log3. And so for you to just change a little setting there to make it unlock it and have it be full frame 4K 60, why is that a big deal? It's just crazy that right now it's a problem. Now, I will say this little toggle here does deactivate a feature if you unlock the full frame 4K 60. It deactivates that in-camera noise reduction at high ISO, which honestly is not a big deal. In fact, I actually prefer the option of having the ability to remove noise in post. I have this application called Neat Video. It's amazing. I invested in it a couple of years ago for client work, and they do tremendous work with the noise reduction in post. So I'm not really tripping on that. I think that is amazing. Now, you also get to have 120 frames a second here, albeit at a 1.5 crop, which I completely accept and understand for this class of camera, right? It's absolutely, if you want the full frame 120, then you got to do something else. That makes total sense to me. That is what it is. Now, for video, you also get the ability to have your LUTs in there. You can preview them, you can bake them in if you want. You have that AI processing chip now that's in all of the cameras that Sony's released, but this one is a little different. It's more closer in line to what the A12 is. Although you're not going to get the same amount of calculations, the A12 is still going to be a superior camera when it comes to autofocus, but this one is just a couple of notches down, and I don't think you're going to notice a difference. If anything, it'll be an improvement over the existing lineup that's underneath that A1 Mark II. So that's huge. There's going to be auto subject detection now, so you don't actually have to select the subject that you want to capture. I think it's just a major upgrade. Honestly, I mean, I think about all these things, and I'm really happy with what Sony's delivered here. Now, I do want to be clear, there's a lot of stuff that people are talking about when it comes to video that I will address towards the end, but first let's zoom out real quick and let's talk about the body of the A7V, because that's also a major upgrade in almost every way. Now, the rumor was that it was going to be using the A7R Mark V body, and you'll hear people reference that in their videos. I feel like that's kind of misleading because while it is pulling from the A7R Mark V design, it's definitely an A7V body. It's not an A7R Mark V body. And I say that because, at least in my mind, I include the ports and stuff like that as part of the body, right? The ports are completely different. The new one has dual USB-C ports here instead of the micro H or USB port. And then the other thing about that is that on the side where the dual card slots are, only one of them is a dual bay card slot, like on the A7 IV. The top here, this dual mode dial here, this top here has basically a release switch for you to turn the modes. The A7V does not have such a dial. So again, it's not exactly the same. And it's not clear if the HDMI, although it's a full-size HDMI port, is as capable as the A7R Mark V, the A7S III, the A9 III, and so on and so forth. On the A7 IV, it was just for video output. You couldn't like do any sort of RAW or anything like that. So I'm not sure if you can do that on the A7V. So that is still to be determined. They didn't mention that, and that would have been something that they mentioned in their video. And they did mention that in the A7S video. They also mentioned it in the A7R Mark V. What I think is a huge deal is that they went ahead and gave us this screen as well, which it was kind of, we were wondering, hey, is this really going to come to the other cameras? Because they've released other cameras since that have not had the display. And this is the first like camera under $3,000 that has this very angle, multi-angle display, which is amazing. I took a picture of an alligator and it was crazy the way I ended up taking it. It was like my camera was like all warped this way. And because I had the screen doing all sorts of crazy funky angles, I was able to capture it as if I was standing where you would imagine I would be if I was taking the photo. But I literally was like above it and the camera was like below to an angle like this, and I was just able to see exactly what I was shooting. And so this display is insane. It's really nice, and they've upgraded it from the A7 IV. The last thing that I'll mention about the body is the fact that it has Sony's passive cooling. So this camera now can shoot that full frame 4K 60 that we talked about, but it's not going to overheat. It's going to be as reliable as the A7S III, as reliable as the A7R Mark V. And again, it brings me back to the FX2 being dead. You know, the conversation about the FX2 is that it has a fan, and maybe that's why you would still want it. But no, I'm telling you, I've shot a job with an A7S III and an FX3, same conditions. Both of those cameras did not overheat. The A7S III is as reliable as the FX3 in terms of thermals, and I am betting everything that it is the same for the A7V to the FX2. And so I got a camera that's not going to give you a problem in overheating, and that was a major issue for me as well with the A7 IV. After 40 minutes, camera would shut down on you and you have to deal with overheating. Overheating absolutely sucks. I'm shooting on the ZV-E1 right now. There is a fan to the back of the camera because it had overheated on me. Now, I am shooting in 4K 60 frames a second, but still, the point is camera overheats and it's annoying. And if you're going to be picking up an A7 V for, you know, any sort of client work, say weddings, real estate, anything where you're doing events, stuff like that, you don't want this camera to overheat on you. You don't. It's just something that you don't want to deal with. If you're going to be doing YouTube videos like this, you're doing family stuff, personal stuff, you don't want your camera to overheat. That's not the way to move. And to be honest with you, I think Sony did an incredible job. There's a lot of conversation that they didn't do enough and that other cameras can do all these things. The ability to film natively above 4K, like 6K or 7K. I don't care about that because my clients are only getting 4K output, if that. Most of the time, it's 1080p. You know, we're talking about open gate for anamorphic and all this other stuff. Well, guess what? If I gave my clients anamorphic delivery and they looked at the footage and it had like, you know, black bars at the bottom and the top, they'd be like, why does it look like that? They'd be like, why does it look like that? What's all with the glare? They wouldn't even understand why it looks like that, right? It's like, I feel like there's YouTube and then there's like reality, you know? And so for me, again, the type of work that I'm doing, it doesn't make any sense. The other part of that is that, you know, now that I'm an open gate for like reframing, I have enough space in here to reframe. And honestly, where it ends up landing at the end of the day is on a phone. And, you know, I saw Gerald's video and I saw his little clapback video. I saw the Creative Fam video. I love that live stream. Shout out to the fellas over there. Yo, all that stuff is true. So nobody's hating on anybody. Everybody's sharing their opinion. And that's exactly what I'm doing in this video. I'm sharing my opinion. I'm not hating on anybody. I'm just trying to say that like all those things that are a big deal that would make another camera better for some people don't make it better for me. And I don't think that that should stop you from looking at this camera, the A7V, because it doesn't have a couple of things that, you know, filmmakers specifically want. I think if you're looking for a hybrid camera, you're going to be hard pressed to find a better one. Again, you have the unlocked capability of the photos, right? You're going to get all that burst rate. You get an extra stop of dynamic range. You're going to get the 4K oversampled from 7K image, both in full frame for 24, 30, and 60. You're going to have the ability to shoot 120 frames in that APS-C mode if you want. You're going to have beautiful color with S-Log 3. The processing engine on there has optimized battery usage and efficiency. So now you're gonna be able to extend your battery life, which is amazing. If the camera doesn't have false color, if you're really doing it, you're probably using an external monitor anyway. So is it a big deal? No, there are actually great tools on the cameras now that allow me to film an S-Log3 in all sorts of conditions, outside, in bright lights, inside, and you can, if you know what you're doing, you'll be able to pull from this camera. So don't let these little things that people are making a big deal sway you from the A7V or your excitement from it if you've already pre-ordered. I think this camera is great. And I remember when the A6400 came out, everybody hated on that camera. I was so hyped when that camera came out. I was like, what? You got a camera that can record unlimitedly. You got a camera that has the A7 III colors, and they were hating on it because it had that flip up screen instead of the flip out screen, you know, and there was some other reasons why they were hating on it. Sony has a lot of hate from the camera community. There's a joke that goes that Sony cameras are like computers with lenses that you can attach to them. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. To be honest with you, it is what it is. You know, it's funny. These same people would spend $9,000 on a Leica camera that shoots in black and white. And I guess I don't understand that. I don't get it. My thing is like, look, I want to give my clients the best image possible. I want them to feel happy with what I'm delivering. And honestly, I want to feel good with what I'm delivering. And when you're shooting with Sony cameras, you're getting that reliability, you're getting that quality, and you just get that peace of mind knowing that at the end of the day, it's going to get the job done, and that's what you need. And so I'm happy with it. I can't wait to get one. I did not pre-order it because, to be honest with you, I don't need another camera right now. I am debating on whether or not I should sell my ZV-E1 and pick this one up, but I like the ZV-E1. I like the form factor. I like the fact that I have another camera that matches one for one with my A7S III as my primary video shooter. So it's a tough one. We'll see what the other videos come out when people actually get their own copy and people making content on it. But yeah, absolutely. And the last thing I'll say is this. Whatever you do, do not get an FX2. It makes absolutely no sense to get an FX2, especially if it's around the same price. I mean, given the light of the situation, the FX2 should be at $1,700 right now. It should not even be anywhere near the price of the A7V, not for its limitations and how much more performance you're gonna get out of the A7V. So do yourself a favor, pick yourself up an FX3, an A7V, but don't get the FX2. Not for that price. Unless you can get it for the same price as the FX30, then you're having a conversation. Now you're talking about being able to use full frame lenses and getting, you know, depth of field and bokeh and the ability to shoot photos and for the same. That's when we start talking. But if we're going to be looking at the FX2 for $2,500 and up, or anything over $2,000 is too much for the FX2. I'm just going to put that out there, guys. Thank you for checking out the video. I'll check you guys out in the next one. Peace.